For a couple of years, I've been wasting time on a series of fanfiction videos set in a world that disregards the sliding timeline that keeps Marvel's cash cows eternally young. Sometimes you get something easy, like we are straight up told how old Iceman is in his very first appearance. Cool, no pun intended, he was born in 1947. And sometimes you get a barrage of contradicting information that was never meant to be scrutinized so severely by some loser with too much time on his hands. Take Kurt Wagner, the X-Men's Nightcrawler, introduced in Giant Size X-Men in 1975. Uncanny X-Men Annual 4 celebrates his 21st birthday, which doesn't mean much because while the idea of the sliding timeline is widely attributed to John Byrne, likely from David Anthony Kraft's Comics Interview 25 from 1985, although I haven't read this magazine so I can't confirm anything, Byrne himself says he did not coin the term and even says Stan Lee was becoming aware of the problem of characters aging in real time back in the 60s and tried to take action to stop this from becoming a problem. See my video on Agatha Harkness for something really out there.
To make a long story short, too late.
Even though Chris Claremont attached some real-world dates to some of the characters early in his X-Men run, see my video about how I believe Colossus's older brother Mikhail was attached to a real-life explosion at the Baikonur Cosmodrome, indicating at least he wasn't thinking too hard about the longevity of some of these characters at the time. Storm is going to be around for 50 years. Doesn't matter, she was born in 51. By 1980, he had mostly gotten away from that, so when Uncanny X-Men Annual 4 came out, I can't be sure this is meant to mean Kurt was born in 1959. For one, Kurt doesn't act like he's supposed to be 16 in Giant Size X-Men. While I can't confirm this, I highly doubt Chris Claremont intended for the previous 5 years of his X-Men work at this point to have actually spanned 5 years for the characters. In part 1 of Chuck Austen's Uncanny X-Men storyline The Draco, we see a flashback of Mystique giving birth to Kurt, somehow set 20 years ago, even though Nightcrawler should be over 21 by this point. Check out my video on how I think Nightcrawler's not baby daddy Azazel is connected to Wolverine's Hit It and Quit It known only as the Native. Hints of Nightcrawler's parentage began in Uncanny X-Men 142, where Kurt comments that he and Mystique are so alike. That's not a lot, but does indicate author Chris Claremont had something in mind connecting these two. Next, in Uncanny X-Men 177, Mystique is fighting fake versions of the X-Men and kills the fake Rogue, her foster daughter, but doesn't kill the fake Nightcrawler, reminding readers there's a connection. But again, no confirmation. Confirmation wouldn't come until X-Men Unlimited 4, that Mystique is Nightcrawler's mother. Chuck Austen's The Draco adds to this by saying Nightcrawler's father is a long-lived mutant Azazel, somehow trapped in another dimension, but able to come out long enough to bang crazy shapeshifters. I've been there. We also have to take into account any and all important issues pertaining to Rogue's age and life, which only compounds the issue much more because just about every time we get a comic that references Rogue's age, it contradicts all the others. Just a few years ago, we got X-Men Blue Origins, which tells us no, Azazel is not Nightcrawler's daddy, Mystique is, and Destiny is his mom. This was, according to Scott Lobdell, who authored X-Men Unlimited 4, Chris Claremont's plan all along, as per this interview from 1996. X-Men Blue Origins tells us Azazel had plans for world domination that involved having a bunch of kids. Destiny, being able to see the future, saw things could end badly unless Azazel thought Nightcrawler was his kid. So this is where it gets confusing in my brain. Mystique, I guess, took on the genetic identity of Azazel and knocked up Destiny, so that biologically, Nightcrawler is, I guess, Azazel's kid, but he's actually Destiny and Mystique's. Destiny gave baby Kurt to Margalit Zardos 5 years before she and Mystique took in Rogue. If you're wondering how Mystique dropped baby Kurt from a cliff in Uncanny X-Men 428, and in X-Men Blue Origins, she gently laid him under a tree, in X-Men Blue Origins, we find out Professor Xavier mentally messed with Mystique and Destiny's minds per their requests. This could account for practically all of Uncanny X-Men 428. Xavier said messing with the mind in such a way can be dangerous and creates further problems. So any continuity issues is from Mystique's warped point of view.
And to make a long story short, too late.
Destiny gave birth to Nightcrawler 5 years before Mystique takes in Rogue. We're not told how old Rogue is. I would guess younger than 8, though later in the comic she looks even younger than that.
Now this is where it gets complex, my lovelies.
In Uncanny X-Men 182, we find out Rogue is only 18 years old.
She was only 16 years old. She was only 16. You're only supposed to blow the bloody doors off.
Much like when we found out how old Nightcrawler was, I can't use this concretely because Rogue was in the comics for 3 years by this point. Am I to take this to mean Rogue was 15 when she attacked Carol Danvers? Maybe? The idea that Rogue was confused and brainwashed by Mystique, leaving most of the wrongdoing at Mystique's feet, is a little easier to swallow if we say Rogue was 15 as opposed to 18. But again, I don't get the feeling 3 full years have passed for the X-Men since Rogue was introduced, especially when you look at Kitty Kitty Pryde, who was 14 in Uncanny X-Men 165 and turned 15 in Excalibur 24, both by Chris Claremont. Sure, by that point, the sliding timeline is definitely in effect, but with how little time passed in the span of 7 real-world years, I can't help but think even less time passed in the span of 3 earlier real-world years. So Rogue is slightly less than 18 when she attacked Carol. No big deal, right? And in X-Men Unlimited 4, Rogue says she spent nearly 10 of the most impressionable years of her life with Mystique. Well, that almost lines up with X-Men Blue Origins, if she's 8 or 9 here. Except that if Nightcrawler was 21 in a comic from 1980 and Rogue was 18 in a comic from 1984, Rogue is pretty clearly meant to be younger than Nightcrawler. But X-Men Blue Origins says Kurt was born, an angry mob formed, Destiny took him to Marguerite Zardos, and Mystique says it's been 5 years since she last saw Destiny. You could say Mystique's mind is still scrambled from what Professor Xavier did to her years earlier and what Xavier recently did to her again. You almost have to say that for any of this to make any sense. When Mystique is recalling this to Nightcrawler, she got confused. It had probably been closer to 10 years since she last saw Destiny. She takes in Rogue, I'd say younger than 8. We're not told how old Rogue was when she ran away from home, but in none of these flashback images does she look older than 8. Her mutant abilities had not manifested when she met Mystique. In Uncanny X-Men 185, Rogue tells Storm about kissing Cody Robbins when her abilities manifested, and she ran away. Many have taken that to mean she ran away from her biological family, but I see no reason Rogue couldn't have run away from her aunt when she was 7 maybe. Then she meets Mystique. A few years later, her powers manifest when she's necking with Cody, and she thinks she's going crazy. She runs away again, only long enough for the voices to clear, and she comes back to Mystique. Classic X-Men 44 says Rogue kissed a boy named Freddy. I think we can say this is Rogue's faulty memories. She's accumulated a lot of memories from a lot of people over the years. We can't blame her for misremembering poor Cody Robbins' real name, can we? Where this gets dicey is when we go back to X-Men Unlimited 4, where Rogue says she spent 9 years with Mystique. If we split the difference from how old Rogue is in Uncanny X-Men 182 and the time that passed since she attacked Carol Danvers in Avengers Annual 10, and say she was 16, almost 17, that might just make everything work. If she was 7 here, then nearly 10 years later, we're roughly when she attacked Carol. In Classic X-Men 44, Mystique is telling Rogue she can't go near boys, but headcanon alert, this is before Rogue's powers manifest. Destiny can see the future. She told Mystique, Rogue's a mutant, here's what's going to happen. Mystique is stubborn enough to fight the future, or tries to, but it happens just the way Destiny said it would. I think this has been informative. Hopefully, from now until the end of time, everyone will steer clear of trying to add to the lore of Nightcrawler, Rogue, or Mystique. I think I figured it all out, as long as everyone just leaves it alone. Yeah, right. Anyway, this has been kind of a long one. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the future with something else. Until then, have a good one.